Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Brony Debates Live. I hope you're all doing well out there. I've got my headphones on backwards. It's Friday night and it's time to freaking party. So, how are we doing tonight? We've got joining us for what should be a really interesting conversation, Mr. Acharky joining us for the first time, who suggested the topic. How are you doing tonight, Acharky?
I have had Taco Bell and donuts, so I should be in a very good mood.
Well, I mean, shoot until it hits your lower intestine.
I didn't eat that much.
Alrighty then, we got Past Analysis joining us for the first time in a while. How are you doing, sir?
Pretty good. It's been way too long. Still in law school, second year, but I'm happy to talk about this. I'm familiar with a lot of fandoms, so I think I can speak on this topic.
Alright, and we've got DJ as per usual. How's it going tonight, DJ?
Bienvenue.
Ready to chat.
I don't even know what that soundbite is. What is that?
It's the Secret Saturdays, you plebeian.
Yeah, I don't
I'm a
recall what
plebeian
that
too.
is.
I don't know what that is.
I saw one episode.
It was a very good show on Cartoon Network about a family that tries to protect cryptozoology.
Interesting.
Secrets.
It was very good. It was very much ruined by the network always airing the only episode of the week at like 5 a.m. on Saturdays.
Ugh.
Yeah, Cartoon Network just seems to hate itself, but that's an entirely different conversation. So, tonight we're gonna talk about fandoms ruining everything. Like I said, this was Acharky's suggestion, and Acharky, you've suggested things before, but this is the first time you've managed to actually get on the show for the topic. What made you want to talk about this?
I guess, in general, it just kind of comes down to, like, you see the internet being what it is, social media, what have you. There are so many things to where, like, it's not, like, it's never just as simple as, like, a show comes out and people can just talk about it. No, there's always, like, there is a wave of just like negativity and cynicism that seems to follow almost everything these days, to a point where it gets really hard for like anybody to enjoy anything when people just start to be toxic about a lot of times the most ridiculous reasons.
Interesting. So, are we here to say that fandoms ruin everything, or are we here to tell them that they don't ruin everything, or are we just here to tell the people that ruin everything to stop ruining everything?
I think, I guess it's just a thing of, like, and granted, I did not put a lot of thought into this when I even made the suggestion. I didn't even think it was going to be chosen, but I guess the question is, even if something has a toxic fandom behind it, is it possible to still enjoy it?
Alrighty then, that's certainly the question. Now, before we get much further into it, I'm going to read off my patrons, specifically the $10 and up tier. I'm very grateful to all of my patrons. They make the bills easier to pay and the content easier to produce. I just paid my editor, Mr. Neo Anton, for the work he did on the last episode of A Buck to the Face. So, yeah, by all means, if you've got other brony friends that don't know about the show, tell them about the show. Let's see if we can get more viewership. Let's see if we can get that up there. Anyway, very grateful, especially to the $10 and up tier. These are Princess Heather Blossom, Shady Oak Ministries, Sid McConroy, Autoknight, Emerald Spencer, Senko, DJ Skywalker, who's with us, Rein-Kun, Morningstar, Pony Cordero, QFlash, Billy Henline, Alden MacManx, EasyModeGamer, Kanto Acrylic VA, Zoro Arc 720, Mr. Sonic 31, Ridge the Hedgehog, and Dark Malcontent, author of the Metaverse series. I believe he mentioned to me that he was changing the name of that. He's going to rebrand it because of the whole Facebook thing. So stay tuned for that update. Anyway, check out all of their links in the description. And support their content as well. They make some pretty good stuff. Acharky it's been a little bit since you've uploaded to YouTube, but he's got a pretty good channel as well. If you haven't seen him before, go check him out too. So
I am working to correct that.
we all are. So I mean, it sucks being an adult. It really does. So give us some opening thoughts here, Acharky. Give us something to sort of catapult ourselves off into the conversation.
So I guess we'll start off with, with MLP. Consider, all things considering here, we saw, what the fandom has been like over the years. There's been some good and there's some bad, and for some, it's kind of hard to divorce what was essentially a children's show targeted towards young girls from just all of the dickheads out there that did that do some of the weird stuff that we even some of the negative stuff that we've seen, and I think there's also there's just this kind of added scrutiny on showrunners, people that right now you've got Gen 5 that's kind of going. And I kind of feel bad for anybody that's even working on the show, because now they're under the scrutiny of all these other people that, that they never asked for as much as the attention that they probably get thrown their way, and some of it being negative, some of it being positive. So, I don't know, when you think of the MLP fandom as a whole, is it, what comes to your mind? Do you think it's been, decent? Do you think we've managed to do well despite some incredible bad actors here and there? As well as people that have been toxic on, despite, the toxicity, I guess. So,
well, I think Brony has been the best fandom objectively. And yeah, we've got some bad ones. Every fandom does. I deal in ratios, right? Now, if you take the average Brony experience of talking to people, especially if you're in one of the subsets of the community, one of the artistic, the animators, the music people, the fan fiction writers, the artists, the video producers of any kind, we all, anybody that actually produces for the fandom will find themselves in one of those sub-communities, or maybe even more, and they'll just have a really good time with each other for the most part. And yeah, you'll get some disagreements here and there. That's normal. That's human nature. The whole reason, the whole message of the show is that you guys can work through it and be stronger friends for your differences rather than despite them, or that you can't be friends because of your differences. And you don't get that as much in other fandoms. In my observations of the furry fandom, they are constantly trying to kill each other all the time. Sonic. I'm gonna say some.
You stole what I was gonna say.
Yeah. Welcome to my show. Anyway, so consider that to compare that to Undertale, right? And those guys have nothing but their gay ships. Compare that to Homestuck, which was really popular right around the same time. Those guys had nothing but their gay ships. And compare that to Steven Universe. I'm seeing this in the chat as well, who had nothing but their gay ships. I'm noticing a pattern here. And constantly bullying each other for perceived wrong thing that wasn't even there. They're just. And then you get the Sonic fans off in the distance there, and for the most part they keep to themselves, but they just make the cringiest fan content to ever exist. So you get outside of outside of Bronies, there's other good fandoms out there. Like, I don't see a whole lot of nonsense really with like the Transformers fandoms or things like that. But those, and there's some video games out there that have some good fandoms behind it. Like, just fighting games in general have really strong communities because those guys are essentially martial artists. So it's a whole sport in itself. But for the most part, yeah, you get these fandoms that just turn toxic like that more so than not. So, Pass, what do you think about the issue at large here of fandoms ruining everything?
So I generally, you were saying earlier, is it that fandoms don't ruin everything? Is it that they do? Or is it that the people who ruin should stop ruining? I lean on the latter. I think that people who ruin should stop ruining. I think that the reason why a lot of fandoms are toxic is because a lot of people are taking this stuff way too seriously. Way too seriously. I mean, it's awesome that people care. But, there is a point where you go into obsession and certain fandoms like the Sonic fandom you mentioned are, I think, particularly egregious. In part because like that fandom is broken. It is broken to its core because Sega has been extremely experimental with Sonic as an IP, and the fandom can't agree on anything.
Let me just throw this out here real quick. I know gosh darn well I'm going to lose some money after this stream because I've got people in my server with Sonic OC profile pictures. So I know I know what I'm saying, but go ahead.
Yeah. I think, to me, I don't think cringe is really, I wouldn't really classify cringe as being toxic. I think the cringe is when people just get way too heated over this stuff. That to me is what makes fandoms wrong and can make it ruin everything. And to be fair, I think that any one of us has the potential to ruin a fandom. I've gotten really passionate about the Sonic IP. Guilty as charged. And I mean, you just have to basically know when to step back and go, hey, you're getting way too into this. We actually had a Brony debate long time ago where we were asking if we were too hard on FIM, on My Little Pony 4th generation.
Yeah.
And I kind of think we were. To an extent. People like we did get a little bit too into the weeds and kind of forgot that it was still a show not intended for our demographic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in general, I would say that people need to.
Or there was a time you were on the receiving end of that too. Remember that time you called Rarity mid back in 2013 and Brony Curious jumped down your freaking throat?
Hey, that was hilarious.
Oh.
That was very jokingly. I thought that was funny. But yeah, like people do that, but unironically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was great. DJ, what do you think?
Honestly, from my experience with the few fandoms I've been in, which has been ponies, Pokemon, a few anime, a lot of the issues I see come up is usually when people start acting like a hive mind in their fandoms, where it has to be all a collective thought, all an agreement, everything has to be approved of, when really it should just be a group of people that just like the same thing. It doesn't have to mean they're in agreement with everything, but you can just like the same thing and have different opinions on them.
Yeah.
And I think that's when everything goes bad, is when people start trying to treat it like a hive mind, and kind of taking things too seriously, where it's one way only and there can be nothing else. Which it's easy to fall into that when you definitely feel ostracized and all that, but that's a reasoning, not an excuse.
Right. So
yeah, I would agree with that.
I'm seeing what I see a lot of people do in the realm of like taking things too seriously. It's not even just that they take it too seriously. I mean, shoot, you could say that I take the show too seriously. I've been making content for it for, over 10 years now. And or no, I'm coming up on 10 years. It'll be 10 years in December. And right, so that's one level of taking it too seriously. But I think the bigger issue is people that never learned how to see outside of their own view, or how to I'm not like, I don't want to be too presumptuous, but I think it's people that never really just got exposed to different ideas other than their own when they were kids. So, or like either they were just alone and never had any friends for whatever reason, or their parents never just told them that everything that they said and did was good, and with no filter. So they never got used to disagreeing and learn how to be different from people. So it's
definitely a recurring theme of not being able to take criticism.
Yeah.
Or
Or the idea of just accepting this person does not like something that I hold near and dear, but that's okay.
See,
there's some people who can say that.
I think also that I don't even think it's limited to people who, didn't experience different points of view in childhood. I think that like it's possible anyone, like if you are like, I don't know, you're 20 and you spend the next 10 years just in an echo chamber, like that's going to make it really, really hard for you to step out of that and realize that there are other perspectives out there. I also, kind of on what DJ was saying earlier, I think that part of why things turn into a hive mind is that people kind of treat the fandom as a source of validation, as a sort of safe space. And part of it being a safe space is other people saying and affirming what you believe. There was that whole, I remember there was a controversy, I think, was it Gen 5? No, it was Season 5 in Gen 4. I'm mixing myself up, but where, Brony Curious had tons of people get mad at him because he didn't mention in the Tanks for Memories episode the 5 stages of grief theory.
Huh.
People actually got mad at him for that.
Yeah, well, everybody else was talking about that. Exactly.
So, like, these people unfortunately were treating it like a sort of safe space, and they needed to keep hearing that idea affirmed, or else they'd start to question it, I guess.
Yeah, we're getting into some very strong religious allegories here.
Well, the word fandom comes from fanatic, which is gonna have religious parallels anyway. I mean, anybody can be a fanatic of anything, and we've certainly we've all met religious fanatics, especially if you were raised religious, that exemplify a lot of these things that we're talking about. The reason why I was never terribly involved in a whole lot of fandoms until Brony, really when I got into Brony, I just didn't have very much of anything else going on for me. But I would look into the other fandoms as they were coming around, and as I was interested in whatever was going on, and just see the nerds I've got a whole lot of nerve calling other people nerds growing up the way I did. I certainly was not, with the in crowd or anything like that. But it was just a lot of like people that it just fit that really bad stereotype that didn't have anything else going for them, and then they picked this one trivial thing that's probably not even very good, and they just wrap their whole identity in it. So I could never get behind that. And the reason why Brony seemed so much better was that people were there was a really good diversity of people, and they were actually having like intelligent conversations with each other and encouraging each other to do better for themselves. Something that another thing that I want to bring up is I have some friends down south, and I was living with them for a little bit some years ago, and we were talking about, the differences between bronies and, say, classical Trekkies, like from the 1970s. And she pointed out to me that a lot of those Trekkies and Star Wars nerds grew up and became scientists and, high-level achievers and engineers and things like that. And what she said was those were the kids that wanted to make what they were seeing in the movies into reality. And then you get bronies, and the bronies' biggest problem in terms of like a fandom is just the rampant low functioning autism, and I'm using that in a very clinical context. So you get these guys and it's like 90% of the fandom that grew up or are currently growing up way out of place, not able to connect with other people in a world that doesn't really understand them or try to connect with them. And then here's this glimmer of hope that is a show in a community focused on come as you are, and then do better by yourself, and we'll be there for you to help you along with that kind of thing. So you've got you compare the Trekkies to the bronies. I told you all that to tell you this. You got those that saw and were inspired by science and became nerds so they could bring what they were, that fantasy, to life. And then you've got people that are living out in brony. You've got them living out a fantasy, which is actually in a lot of cases helping them overcome their social problems. They get attracted by this concept of friendship, so they're learning how to be friends. If any of that, I've been ranting for a little bit here. Does anybody want to add or take away from what I'm saying?
To kind of add to that, like, I know, like, with me personally, it's because the biggest thing, as I have been going through reviewing the series myself recently, so, like, and it's been kind of, because, despite how much I've watched these episodes, like, it's been interesting going through this again in recent years and seeing how this stuff has held up. And the biggest thing about MLP was not just about making friends, but just kind of learning, like, here's how you can be a better person in general in a number of ways. And granted, there are some things about it that, there are some times where some things where it's like, I don't agree with this message. Feeling picky king. Honest
apple for me.
Yeah. But there are a lot of times where it's like, this is something that maybe I can learn to adjust my behavior accordingly. Or maybe it reminds me of something to where it's like, oh yeah, you know what? Maybe that is something I should work on. Because yeah, like it's, and I am not somebody that's been diagnosed on the spectrum or anything, as full disclosure, but I can kind of see what you mean, to where there are individuals who just have trouble interacting with other people and interacting in groups and seeing this thing that kind of invites inclusivity and maybe helping to show, like, hey, here's how you can be part of the conversation. Here's how, you can be approachable and learn to approach others and the like. So let me, I definitely see that.
Let me ask you this, Acharky. In fandom in general, any kind of fandom, how much of it is people just sort of enjoying something together and how much of it, or compared to those who are just very, very loud and obnoxious in the way that they disagree. Like, is it an actual problem, or are we projecting because of a very vocal minority? What's your thoughts on that?
That's where I'm going to say it is something of a case-by-case basis, because that's something where I'd almost go as far as to say where with something like MLP, I think there is a vocal minority when you hear people like getting mad over like stupid stuff.
Oh,
you know, like, oh, why'd they make Tabitha St. Germain change how she talks like Derpy? It's like, it's fine. But other cases, however, the unfortunate problem is that it's not a vocal minority. It is an unfortunate vocal majority. Especially when the biggest example that comes to mind for me, the two big ones are like Marvel and Star Wars. Star Wars most egregious, or like is the most egregious in my opinion, because of, you know, actors, people who just want to do their job and be in a movie and play their part, and then get chased off of social media by idiots who, and in many cases, just downright awful people who have no business opening their mouths. And it's like, when that Obi-Wan series premiered, and then like, and that the Star Wars fandom, I swear, is almost like anytime there's like Star Wars stuff on social media, it's almost like a litmus test of like, yep, these are people who shouldn't be procreating, because it's like Obi-Wan came out as a series, and then people were getting upset. Why? Because, oh, Obi-Wan wouldn't have lost that fight to, you know, this Inquisitor lady. Like, shut up! Like, it's a fictional thing. Like, yeah, like, and of course, and it was so bad that like Ewan McGregor had to come out and say like how disappointed he was to see people ragging on this actress, and it's like, gosh, like, you guys got to stop.
I have a question I want to follow up that with, but before I do that, do any of the other gentlemen have anything you want to add or take away from what you said?
Yeah. So there are a couple things here I want to kind of add to. I think that, you know, I definitely agree that toxicity, particularly like in this context, yeah, trying to get actors or actresses, you know, to feel like they should kill themselves, or, you know, that type of stuff, that clearly falls into toxicity for me. I don't know if I would say people having kind of outrageous beliefs about a show really qualifies as being toxicity. I think in general, we all kind of just need to, I mean, this is kind of a little bit of a simplistic answer, but we kind of just need to learn to take this stuff with a grain of salt. It is just a show. It's great to get passionate about it, but you take it to a reasonable point, and then stop. And of course, you know, what we define as being reasonable, that no one agrees on that. You know, you got people who, no one agrees. You got people who think it's okay to be, you know, spiraling on a particular actress. I know that Mysterious Mr. Enter comes to mind as someone who takes things a bit too serious.
Oh yeah.
He's not as bad as he was way back when.
Maybe I haven't seen him in recent times, but
no.
Yeah.
It's a much more calmed and mature channel.
Ah, gotcha.
Yeah.
As you were saying, Pest.
Yeah, and beyond that, that's sort of what I had to say for the time being. I guess one other thing. I agree with you that I do think a lot of people, you know, took from MLP important lessons. I sometimes wonder, though, if a portion of the people who say that are only just saying that because their actions don't really measure up to them saying that. It seems like, you know, you say that you're learning a lot from the show, but it doesn't really look like you are because you're doing things that the show has pretty clearly said not to do.
So, Acharky, here's a question I want to have, and I want to ask. I'm playing devil's advocate here, but to what extent is criticism of fandom criticism of a source material justified if it was shown to be up to a certain standard or have an established lore and so yeah, established lore, a standard of editing quality, a standard of acting or production quality, standard of writing quality, and then the new stuff or whatever they're criticizing it because it fell short of what it was previously or contradicted what came before it. So when that happens, how much is the fandom critique justified?
So that's a really good question, and I'm gonna kind of generalize some stuff here, but let's say to kind of generalize this, here's a really good example that comes to mind for me is Man of Steel, Superman film. You know, not to kind of take away from, you know, like MLP, but like Man of Steel, I have a number of criticisms about that. I have a number of criticisms about like Zack Snyder and the like. But my criticisms are not this movie stinks because Zack Snyder's a poopy head or something. No, it's when I look at Man of Steel, I look at the problems of this is not true to the character, and there are a number of choices made within the script that I feel were not good choices in service, like they're choices made in service to a bad narrative. And what I mean by that, like, because in Man of Steel, the biggest thing was Superman has to snaps Zod's neck in order to stop him from killing people. And the whole thing is that, oh man, yeah, like Superman had to kill that guy. Well, yeah, he did because you wrote the story in service of creating that moment. You could have written something to where he didn't even have to do that at all. And that's why I take issue with the story and why I take issue with having to write this story where Superman kills the guy, and Zack Snyder even himself said. And personally, and you know, and just to kind of get out of the way, it doesn't matter if it was Zack Snyder who made that decision, or it could have been Steven Spielberg or Martin Scorsese, whoever. Regardless of who it was, the fact that the person in charge decided to say, I want a story where this moment happens, and then you go around trying to create a narrative just for that and trying to defend it. Like, no, he had to kill that guy. It's like, well, no, he didn't. You made the story to do that. So that's where I'm being critical of it, to say, this is bad, and these are the reasons why. You know, I'm not saying this is bad because you stink and you should be fired. Like, you know, nothing like that. And it's the same philosophy I have when reviewing MLP. Is me personally, I just got annoyed when, after watching episode less than 0, and then you get to season 2's finale where none of the other 5 want to listen to Twilight because it's a wedding. Yeah. And that got to me, and I said so in my review, but at the same time, I said this also, is that I'm not condemning Megan McCarthy because she had to write both episodes, and I'm not saying Megan McCarthy should be fired. No, like, it's just, there are reasons that they had to do what they did in service of the story that they did. And, you know, maybe I couldn't even think of what a better solution is, you know, because I'm not a Hollywood writer and don't get paid for this. And I'm sure some people would say that and say, well, you've got no business critiquing this. Like, I'm just a guy. I've never claimed to be a professional.
Okay, so I'm sorry, go ahead, finish.
So to kind of bring it back to your question of, where the line is on questioning the lore and questioning, you know, in service of story and the like is, I think when a show establishes something, you kind of have to look at it within the rules that the show's kind of putting before you in a way. And I think also when it comes to lore, quote unquote, within like anything, whether it's MLP, Marvel, Star Wars, what have you, I think people do need to be able to loosen up on that stuff and kind of accept like different interpretations and maybe being able to play fast and loose with some of the rules. I don't know. But well, again, I apologize if I rambled on that. But
yeah, so let me counterpoint that a little bit here, because when people are making critiques like that, at least they think, and okay, so here's what I'll do. I'll give you that there's sometimes maybe even a significant percentage of the time, but I won't say more than half. Sometimes, at the very least, there's people who are just being toxic about it in one way or another, or prejudiced in one way or another. But the reason why lore is important when you've established that is the people came to your franchise because it was something unique that they enjoyed. It spoke to them for some reason. And if you just go and change that, then you're changing the very essence of what got them to enjoy it. And then what you're doing is you know it actually takes me back to the Bible. The Proverbs are only supposed to mean one thing, because if the Proverbs can mean anything, then they mean nothing. And it's the same thing here. And people do kind of need their escapism. Life can be pretty hard sometimes, and we want to be able to sit down and enjoy things, and then not just have someone with some kind of agenda just flip it out of nowhere and change what we liked and what we got enjoyment out of that and what we found camaraderie and that kind of thing. So if somebody is doing that kind of thing multiple times and they're not listening to critiques, and they're turning it on the fans, and they're doubling, they're just doubling down, then it starts to seem disrespectful. And so then why wouldn't we want to fire Zack Snyder? He obviously doesn't. He obviously doesn't care about that. And why would we want a guy who doesn't care about this thing that we like making this thing that we like?
So there's also a really good example, because I agree very much with what you're saying, because while I'm okay sometimes with lore being fudged a little bit in some ways to kind of
there's a difference between I'll say this right now, I'll clarify it. There is a big difference between expanding the lore and contradicting the lore. And
right,
I think people by and large are good at figuring out which is which. Like, there's a lot of times in Friendship is Magic where people is like, oh, this is a retcon, and I'm like, no, it is an expansion of the way it can work, and it usually starts with, first of all, we didn't know that much to begin with, so they could have filled it in with anything. But
yeah,
if you're if you're talking about if Superman suddenly came from the planet Vegeta, that's something.
I want to see that now.
Just go watch Dragon Ball again, dude. It's
yeah.
So but you get what I'm saying there. You just go, when you retcon things, it's different. But I'm sorry I interrupted you. Go ahead.
And here's why I agree with
as well. When you guys just let you know.
Yeah, I gotcha.
I very much agree, especially because of a recent critique I had on a series of Netflix's Masters of the Universe Revelation. And that thing really plays fast and loose with its lore, and it drove me nuts. And the thing is, I'm not the biggest He-Man fan, and I'm sure some people would be like, well, why are you critiquing it? Hey, my channel, whatever. You don't have to watch it. But like, I don't even know everything there is to know about Masters of the Universe lore. But part 2 in particular, and this was one of my biggest grievances with it, you beat the viewer over the head with a couple of rules that, like, okay, you have established that. But then by the final act, you threw that out the window, and it's like, but you just said this, why are you doing this now? And it made no, like, I was scratching my head so much, and it was one of those things where even after watching it, the more I thought about it, the more I was like, that's ridiculous. And like, Revelation as a whole, I gave a 2 out of 5, both part 1 and part 2, same thing. And I'm sure there are people that would look at what I said and like, you know, am I being too harsh or am I being toxic? No, I'm not being toxic, and the reason I would say that is because when I was critiquing those stories, as you'll see in my videos, you know, I'm trying to be critical of the writing and asking, you know, why are they doing this? This didn't make sense, and this is how I felt about this. I'm not saying, you know, oh, this stinks because Kevin Smith sucks. Like, no, I don't have that opinion of Kevin Smith. It's just the story tried to, like, again, within the same setting, giving me rules and then not caring about them.
So yeah, you're agreeing with me in that. But let's hear what Pest had to say.
Yeah, so I understand where you both are coming from, but I do have to push back a little bit. And where I have to push back is that there is a certain point in any show where after a certain point in time, after it's just been breaking its rules for so long, the early rules, you just kind of have to move on. And the best example I have of that is the RWBY fandom. Or should I even say hate-dom to some extent. Because
yeah, RWBY's got nothing but gay ships going for it.
See, the thing that annoys me is RWBY, like a lot of people who, you know, routinely, like their channels are entirely based around criticizing RWBY. They have been criticizing RWBY since, really, if I was going to be generous, I'd say since the beginning of season 4. And there are 8 seasons. There have been more seasons of it that they have hated than they haven't enjoyed. So after a certain point, I really do think you should stop watching for your own sanity. It's not productive. And I mean, my personal rule of thumb is, I generally would say, if you like watch it, if you want to watch the entire season through, by all means. But if you get through it and you're like, that was a terrible season, I hated everything in it, it was so bad, then I would say that I have like about a 50% chance that I probably should stop watching. And then if the season after that is also bad or worse, then that's even more reason to stop watching. That's like 75% reason to stop watching. So I think that there is a point where, you know, you kind of just have to say, okay, yes, the Superman movies are wildly inaccurate, but this is not worth my time anymore. It's just an entirely different thing.
So, Pest, I mean, just, I'm listening to you talk, and is anybody else getting biter flashbacks?
Yeah.
What?
Sorry, that's not a thing I know.
Oh,
Is that the guy you mentioned? Is that the guy you mentioned, like in something a while back? He was like a brony hater or whatever. Or you mentioned in a previous.
He was an early fandom analyst, and he was just notorious for hating everything about the show. And we've mentioned him a couple of times on this show too, and it was Cordero usually says, like, yeah, who had a gun to that guy's head making him watch the show?
Probably
Yeah.
YouTube money.
Say what?
YouTube money.
No,
he
not
wasn't-
at 200
no.
subscribers.
No. For some reason, people just get into like these habits, and the habit might be, well, I always watch this show, even if you're no longer liking the show. Like, even if you hate everything that the show is for the last, I don't know, 8 years, like, move on for your own sake.
It's like, what are you doing? Like,
What are you doing?
Mhm.
I mean, at some point, it really is the sunk cost fallacy,
It
where
is.
they've invested so much time. Like, it feels horrible to give it up on the small premise that it gets better.
But see,
Like, even
you
I've had
don't
to make
even
some of those
need.
decisions. I recently just dropped watching the Overlord anime because I just wasn't enjoying where it was going. So
You don't even need to, like, I think the best way to kind of get out of that mindset of the sunk cost fallacy is to not look at it as though you've lost anything. Like, you can still return to the stuff that you like. You can still rewatch that stuff. You just don't have new stuff. And yeah, okay, that's not great. Obviously, we would prefer to have more stuff that we like, but you still, I mean, as long as you still like the old stuff, you still have something to return back to. So
yeah, that is actually a point I made in a video I did more than a year ago now. I did an unscripted video just kind of talking about reboots and stuff in general, not to derail, but it's this whole idea of something like a thing you liked had some really good stuff, and then a new iteration comes along and either you don't like it or maybe it's just terrible all around, and then you're like, oh, now this thing I like is ruined. Well, no, because if you can still go back and watch the part that you liked, then it's not ruined, is it? You know,
Exactly.
All you have to do is ignore Legend of Korra and you're golden.
you know, I'm actually really happy you brought that up, because that, Legend of Korra is another example of, like, Ruby, where the Legend of Korra is very different in quality from, Avatar: The Last Airbender, and I definitely agree that there are a lot of problems with it. So, you can just go back to it. Just ignore it. Just ignore the existence of the Legend of Korra.
But I mean, I kind of have to. But by the same token, for God's sakes, it did have better choreography. Well, no, I shouldn't say it had better choreography. I really shouldn't. They're very different. It's like comparing apples to oranges.
Korra had some good moments.
I liked the art style better of Korra.
I have a hot take.
Tell me your hot take. I love hot takes on
take.
this show.
My hot take is Korra does not, this is going to be a weird one. She does not seem to me to feel like a Southern Water Tribe person. She mainly relies on firebending and earthbending. She hardly ever uses waterbending. She hashtag not my Southern Water Tribe avatar. Like, no.
That's easy to explain away, though.
I'm
What?
the Avatar.
That's
You
easy to
gotta
explain away
deal with
since
it.
She left the tribe when she was like 5.
Yeah.
So.
But see that,
And
but,
also,
like,
remember, guys. I'm the Avatar. You gotta deal with it.
see, but the thing is, it's the same thing with the Superman point you were making earlier. They chose to do that. They chose to have that happen, and I don't think that they necessarily had to do that.
no.
They didn't have, like, it doesn't, to me, it doesn't really make sense why someone that young in the Southern Water Tribe would be able to learn firebending and earthbending like that. It just, no, that.
Well, that was the beginning of the problems, and it's just a darn shame that it had such a cooler art style, and that it had way better villains. Because everything else about that story and the way that it disrespected the lore just tanked it. But there's other stuff I want to talk about if you guys don't mind me moving things along here.
Yeah.
So there's 2 more things I want to talk about. I'm going to say them now, and hopefully we can retain them. So let's talk about the 2 sides of show interacting with fandom, and that being, how the producers interact with fandom, and then we'll talk about how the fandom influences the show. So I'll start off, and I want to say that one of the most surefire ways a fandom can ruin something, especially the show itself, is if the show staff lets the fandom write for it. So if second you, unless you already planned it from the beginning, and it was, unless you already planned it from the beginning, if you make, especially if you change the direction something was going because the fans are shipping these two characters and you want to pander to the fans, that is one way. That is the most surefire way to have a fandom absolutely ruin something, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
What do you guys think about that?
I completely 100% agree. Yeah. No, that happens, unfortunately, a lot. And it is typically always framed. It's always framed in the sense of, well, it's a gift to the fans. But see, the thing is, I really would argue that it's not totally. It's a gift to the fans that wanted that particular thing. It's not a gift to the entire,
How about your gift to the fans just be you write the good story and stay on the track that you were on.
Yeah. Slice of Life to me is not a very good episode. Just to pointing that out, I think that's very topical to what we're bringing up right now. I know that some people like it. Personally, I just think it was fun when we had that stuff as memes just on YouTube. Yeah, but that's not what I go to the show for.
Yeah, but that's not what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the fandom writing the show, and that's only just one episode that's meant to be a gag. That wasn't the fandom writing the episode. That was the writer looking to reference memes. And it could still, to someone who had no idea what was going on, still stand on its own. I mean, I would get ridiculed endlessly, but I could show Slice of Life to my parents and they would understand what's going on. They might have questions about the characters, and I would just have to tell them, oh, you see those 6 characters that are huddled up right there and they keep fighting the giant monster? They're the main characters. This episode is focusing on these characters that we always see running around in the background, and what they're doing. And there's been at least one episode of that in every major show. I've seen that episode 3 times in The Simpsons.
Oh yeah.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, Bryan, you're talking about when the production staff will alter the story because of fan theories, like what happened with the video game Hello Neighbor.
Yes. Or Five Nights at Freddy's. That's probably the worst one. Or the fact that
we don't really have any evidence on that, though. We have blatant evidence that Hello Neighbor's staff went out of their way to follow fan theories. With FNAF, it most likely was just Cawthon pulling a Toriyama.
Yeah.
Well, hold on. What's pulling a Toriyama?
Riding by the seat of your pants.
Ah, yes. He definitely tends to. I was hanging out with my friends on over here on Wednesday, just trash talking Toriyama's writing style and how he can't keep anything straight.
It's not the best writing style, but it can be enjoyable.
So, but to be clear, what are examples of the fans writing an episode? I'm not sure I've seen this other show.
I'm not sure I could pull a specific example off the top of my head, but I'll bet you everybody else here thought of at least one example when I said that. For me, it's gonna be in terms of that. It's gonna be the fact that Lyra exists. Yeah.
There was that rumor with WandaVision.
Yeah. Again with the gay ships. That's like the meme of tonight. It's just the gay ships ruin everything. That's my conclusion. I know. Yeah.
I will say that me personally, I have no problem with the gay ships.
I know. I'm trolling.
I know. Yeah.
But no, there's the unfortunate kind of side effect that has kind of come of the connected world that we live in, and the fact that social media, you know, allows groups of people to be as loud as they are, is that these people feel like they've been given some kind of power, especially when some changes do happen. But like, because to kind of take things into perspective, when the Sonic the Hedgehog movie had to make the change that it did, and you had, you know, people out there being like, see, this was a victory for the fans because we made it happen. No, you didn't. Sonic got redesigned in that movie because that design became the laughing stock of the Colbert Report. So it was just like, when late night TV, the most mainstream outlet there possibly is making fun of you, that's not because of just fandoms. That's how bad that was.
And that's a very, very strong sentiment at the moment in with the video game movies, especially with how much the backlash has been with Chris Pratt as Mario.
Yeah, and
they're trying to replicate what happened with Sonic to try and get them to recast Chris Pratt, and like, you people really don't know how this stuff works.
No, that's not going to happen because again, like, nobody, like, as vocal as they are trying to be about that, that's not going to happen. Absolutely not.
Yeah, I mean, it was just pure economics. It made no sense to release the Sonic movie with that model. Whereas, I mean, Chris Pratt is like, I don't think that Chris Pratt himself ruins it for anyone. No. It's just a kind of mild annoyance. That's been my general, like, that's sort of what I found. That's sort of what other people seem to be saying, is it's like, yeah, it's not ideal, but so for that reason, they're not going to change it because there's no. So yeah, like what you were saying, they didn't change Sonic simply because the fans were outraged. It's because it would be an economic catastrophe.
Yeah, no, because that first Sonic trailer, you did not have to be a Sonic fan. You didn't have to know anything about that character. Any person in the world that can look at a movie trailer would looked at that thing and said, Jesus Christ, and was like, they really want to put that in movie theaters? And as I said, like, that trailer was the butt of late night television jokes.
And that's why I got put on Disney Plus.
Like, exactly, yeah. Like, it's like,
Fox movies is such a roar.
Like, that thing was such an embarrassment that they really couldn't ignore it. Like, that, the fandom, I don't think, had any real influence in changing that. That really was just a case of mainstream audiences are just doing nothing but pointing and laughing at you. Yeah, but kind of the unfortunate side of the coin on that is when you had to bring up Mr. Snyder again, allegedly, I'm choosing my words here, allegedly, this guy weaponized his own fans to get the quote-unquote Snyder cut that didn't exist to exist. And do that whole reshoot of Justice League that's like 5 hours on, like, because even the executives were like, we should not let anybody have this much power ever again, and why they wanted to get rid of him.
It was a much better movie, though.
Sure, it was, but...
And it did exist in some... Parts of it did actually exist.
I guess, yeah.
Because
but
he was filming before, tragically, he did have to step down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But at the same time, like, when you have... like, having anybody out there, even like somebody within the industry trying to quote-unquote weaponize fans against a thing just to kind of get their way, I don't think that's healthy.
Oh, no.
Not even for fans of any said thing, and certainly not for whatever creative team that gets unfortunately caught in that crossfire and have no decision-making power at all in that stuff.
So that's a good segue into the second half of that, the question I was asking earlier. Now let's talk about how producers interact with the fandoms. And it sort of goes into what we were talking about earlier in how they take critiques. But we've seen a lot especially in recent years, of where they just can't take the critique, where they do make something bad, and instead of taking the critique and doing better or stepping away from it, which is what any director would have done in any other period of time, they just call you bigoted. is like, and I won't sit here and say that bigoted comments don't happen. Like I said,
No.
It happens. I've seen it. I can fully admit it. I don't think it happens enough to justify the general attitude, and I definitely don't think responding to, hey, these characters weren't right with you're just a bigot is as a blanket statement is conducive. So is that the fandom's fault, or is it the fandom's fault, or or are these things actually just being ruined by their producers? What do you guys think?
I would say it's more on a case-by-case basis. It's not going to be one or the other necessarily. I suppose we would the most obvious one to point to at the moment is the Lord of the Rings show, which has faced a lot of backlash ever since it was announced, and then a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff has come out. That definitely seems to be a lot more on the fault of the people behind the scenes. Of course, there are going to be some strong fans because that fandom has been going on for 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
So that one has a lot of history behind it, to the point where you can become a professor in Tolkien history. How that works, I have no idea. I'm not a Tolkien fan. I've never even seen The Lord of the Rings.
The thing, I kind of agree that it is a case-by-case basis, especially because this is one of the times where, and again, I'm not saying this is 100%, but I feel like this is one of the times where you shouldn't just blame the fans on something, especially when fans are trying to give honest and productive critique on something. And when you have, it's easy to look at a lot of negativity and be sad and be like, oh, you people just don't get it or whatever. But it's like, there are probably, I've seen disagreements on content that I've made, but I'm not going to go after them and say, well, you don't get it. It's like, because there are some people are like, hey, I liked Mysterious Ne'er-Do-Well. And it's like, you are not wrong. And I'm glad that you like Mysterious Ne'er-Do-Well. I just don't. But another really good example, once again, looking at you, Masters of the Universe Revelation, Kevin Smith, there was a bunch of stuff that he came out on social media, and there are images of him crying and all this stuff. And I think most recently he said he wasn't going to do any Marvel or DC projects because of how people reacted to Master of the Universe. And, I look at that, it's like, Kevin, bro, I'm not blaming you as a person and saying you suck when I say Revelation was bad. When I say Revelation was bad, it just means I didn't like how you wrote it. I have no idea how you are as a person. I'm sure you're probably okay as a person. It's just, I have no issue with you as a person. I'm just saying your story got on my nerves and I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah, and Kevin Smith's...
Your story was bad, your actions were bad.
Kevin Smith's default lately has been to attack the fans, so...
Which is not healthy for anyone.
No.
Fortunately, I've been living under a rock. I'm not aware of the situation. But I would agree with them that it's a case-by-case basis. And I would just generally say that I think, on average, for kind of sensible reasons, creative, people who make something tend to be very, protective of it. And I definitely think that, I think the healthy thing is they just need to, they need to let it, just let it happen, because when you actually try to rein it in, you actually make it worse.
Here's how we save fandoms according to what you just said. Everybody, go delete your Twitter account right now.
I mean, that would be the most intelligent thing the entire
And
world has
delete
ever done.
delete your
would
Tumblr
be
account while you're at it.
It
Well, I
would be the
deleted my
most
Facebook months
intelligent
ago.
thing. Just let people comment honestly. The more that you try to fight it, as like the more creatives try to fight it, the more fuel you give to the fire. And
Yeah, I think. Sorry,
yeah.
go ahead.
No, you go. I was pretty much
So,
done.
like, because I think a really good example, and maybe I'm wrong on this because I don't pay attention to every single thing, but like J.J. Abrams, I'm sure he probably got a lot of flack for whatever he did with Star Wars and whatever he did with Star Trek, but I don't see J.J. Abrams out there attacking Star Wars fans and Star Trek fans and saying, no, you guys just don't get it. No, to my knowledge, he didn't say, he said squat. And the thing is, that was probably the best thing for him to do.
Well, Kathleen
Yeah,
Kennedy had a lot to say, and there's a lot of theories out. Yeah, and there's a lot of theories out there that that's where all of those creative decisions were really coming from. So that's just something to consider. I don't know.
Yeah.
Johnson and Kennedy were way too talkative and very defensive.
Oh boy.
Yeah. I mean, like, don't crucify me, but I am a fan of The Last Jedi, and even though I do like that movie, I will say that Rian Johnson did not handle the criticism.
He did not
particularly well.
So, unless there's something someone else wants to add or take away here, I think I'm ready to move on to audience participation. Are we good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Bring up She-Hulk.
Alrighty then. No, we're not, because what She-Hulk? There is no She-Hulk. Okay, that's what that show deserves. Just be.
I mean, that's the smart way to go about it.
Just be forgotten. Okay.
I'm not even paying attention to that. What's She-Hulk?
Yeah, good job, Pest.
That's the point.
All right, so Harriman says fandoms aren't what ruin franchises. The producers either pandering to the wrong fans or deliberately going against the fandom for spite that ruins everything. So we just got done talking about that a little bit. Does anybody want to respond to Harriman?
I would definitely say still stick with case-by-case basis where it can be on the fault of either party. Sadly, there's been a lot of instances in the past few years where you do see a lot of it on the producers, but the fans are not always the best to respond to it either.
No.
Yeah.
No, I agree with that.
Here's what I'll I should amend what I was saying earlier, because like I said, I'm not going to say it doesn't happen, because I've seen it happen where people are just being bigoted. But like, if someone gives you a response like, hey, this character wasn't written, a criticism like this character wasn't written very good, and your first thing is you call them racist, now they're just going to clown on you because that's for the first place. And that's when you're going to get even more, bigoted people. So you're going to reap what you sow.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yep. I would agree with that.
Paladin Pony T's got a couple of questions here. He says, are there any fandoms that are so bad you will not go near them? Furries.
Undertale.
Fandoms that are so bad I won't go near
I am
them.
so glad I don't know any furries. I can only imagine how bad that would be.
I would never go into the furry fandom just because I'm not into that topic.
I feel like if I'm ever just in the same room as one, I would just catch some kind of STD.
Ronnie, I hate to break it to you, but
and I would certainly never go shoot a furry's wedding either. Like that would not... You thought I didn't know what I was saying for a second, didn't you? Why would
as you have my freaking Twitter profile picture right there. Drawn by my wonderful boy Dogi, by the way.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, I don't actually think that there is a fandom. I wouldn't nothing comes to mind as something that if I generally get into a type of show or something, I'll take a look at the fandom. I haven't really run into how
about Super Hulock?
Okay, I do have to edit what I said. There is maybe one fandom.
Oh, there's no fandom that I hate. What about this one? Okay, never mind.
It's not that particular one. I was remembering what we were saying earlier, near the beginning of the stream. I do think that I would say, generally, I'm I tend to want to stay away from the Sonic fandom. That fandom, I just get way too. It's too toxic. It's way too toxic.
I
like the games, but
yeah. So here, and maybe call me naive. I feel like the only answer I would have would be like very extreme cases. Like if there's an Andrew Tate fandom, like I'm steering clear of that. But like in general,
that's a good point.
But in general,
let him finish.
In general, like the Star Wars fandom, which to me is one of the worst, right up there with like sports fans who just take it way too seriously.
Oh yeah.
But even though there are people within the Star Wars fandom I can interact with, and I feel like that's the case for everyone, is that there are people I can interact with as long as they are also cool with me when I say, hey, that's great, I'm just not into it that much.
Here's what I've noticed. I've had a few friends over the years, and whenever I see someone say, I'm leaving the Brony fandom for X, right? And it's, in my experience, and I'm sure there's others, but in my experience, every time I've heard that, it's either they're leaving it for Undertale or they're leaving it for Steven Universe. Now, I don't know why you have to leave one fandom for another, but every single one of those people have turned out to be freaking sociopaths. Ooh. And just horrible people. Now, Undertale as a game has some, it looks like a well-designed enough game. Not anything that I would enjoy playing, but I'm not going to say there's not a story there and that there's not an interesting universe there. That would be unfair. Steven Universe, however, in fandom and in show has absolutely zero redeeming qualities. Because your show has nothing going for it but gay ships, you are attracting people in a fandom who have nothing going for them except gay ships. So
I would not. Yeah, I don't agree with this.
So I know, but seriously, no. When you base your whole, I mean, I've been joking and memeing on the gay ships thing all night, right?
Yeah,
but here's the crux of what I'm saying, right? Is when you base your whole story and characterization on something so shallow and menial, you're gonna attract an audience that's shallow and menial, and that base their entire personalities on that. And when you have something shallow and menial, that you've based your entire personality off of them, whenever something challenges that, you're just gonna be triggered constantly, okay? Not only did Steven Universe have one of the worst shows I've ever seen, but at no point in time in the Brony fandom did somebody get bullied to near suicide because they drew someone the wrong body type. Now, something I have seen in Brony is some vitriolic conversations going back and forth sometimes, because I've always been a fan of humanized artwork. I think it's a really, interesting way to, analyze the characters, because you can do a lot for characterization by changing these simple pony figures into a complex human form with clothes and skin and things like that. So sometimes in the old Brony fandom, if say, it was really common for people to draw Twilight with dark skin. And or just any of the characters, like sometimes Fluttershy was portrayed with dark skin, or Pinky or Dash or Applejack or Luna, right? And if a character had too much melanin in their skin for any character, or not enough that didn't match up with somebody else's headcanon, I saw some pretty racist conversations going on in the early fandom with that. So I'm not going to say that didn't happen, but we never bullied anybody into suicide.
Well, that's
the
true.
Steven Universe fandom. The Steven Universe fandom had one of those every other month. They had one of those every month on average.
I will say one thing though, and maybe this is my limited understanding. But as a general rule, you should never, ever leave a fandom by announcing, I am leaving the fandom. That is just a bad way to leave any fandom.
Right, you just got to do what
no.
Woodlord
No, no.
did. You just got to do what Woodlord did and just release an April Fool's Day video saying you're leaving the fandom and then disappear off the face of the planet.
I was just going to say disappear off the face of the planet. I don't think you need to do an April Fool's video.
Well, that's
Like,
what he.
Just move on.
Just move on. Exactly.
Yeah, like I've had things where over time my interest would wane, but I never felt the need to be like, well, I'm done with Transformers, goodbye. Like, no, it's like, it's whatever. And then
More often
I
they're
just
just trying to get attention.
It's
Yeah,
a very
and then-
narcissistic tendency.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it's like
So basically, fans of a fandom, if you don't want to be the reason you ruin everything, or especially your own fandom, quit being a narcissistic prick.
yeah.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, your opinion is not important, and nobody cares about you. Enjoy.
That's the equivalent of saying, that's the Zoidberg quote. This film is bad and you should feel bad.
Yeah, so just make peace with that, and if you can't make peace with that, leave. But once you make peace with that, you will begin to become a tolerable person that doesn't ruin everybody's experience, right? So you know what? I want to tell you a story, guys. And I used to be friends with a guy, and the last time I saw him was like 2013 or 14, something like that, right? But he was a brony for a while. And we became bronies like separately. So he was a fan of the show, and he really thought like the first 3 seasons were really good. He collected all the comics, right? But he refused to call himself a brony. And the reason being was because he believed there was a pedophile problem in the fandom. And I mean, yes, pedophiles exist everywhere, and death to pedophiles. Okay, I'm on everybody's case tonight. If you haven't noticed, I'm just ultra based. Anyway, one example that he would always bring up is at one of the Brony cons, one of the early ones, like it might have even been like 12 or 13. 2012 or 2013, when, keep in mind, Michelle Krieber was like 12 or 13 years old herself.
Oh dear.
And there are people, grown men our age or older, going to these conventions just straight up hitting on her, right? So, yeah, that's a problem. And I can understand if you didn't want to be didn't want to be associated with that kind of thing. Yeah. I will put the bronies over this as well. We've had a couple of pedophiles that we've caught. We're pretty good at not letting them around anymore.
Yeah.
I will say with utmost certainty, you can't say the same for the furry fandom.
I don't have enough knowledge of the furry fandom.
Well,
and I prefer to keep it that way.
So I will put the caveat out there right now that, of course, I have not been to every furry convention, right? I haven't been to any furry convention, but I have seen in just my time perusing YouTube, listening to YouTube while I'm at work, I've counted at least 5 high-profile furry fandoms that will let known convicted pedophiles work for them, or if they know that they're coming, they won't do anything about it because they believe it's a protected class, or a protected kind of thing. That's never happened in the brony fandom. If there's pedophiles that we know about, they're going to show up to the fandom. We bring it to people's and all, but with one exception. I think it was BronyCon 2019 that had Grizzly the medic on their staff. Yeah. Aside from that, that was we haven't. So I just shot my own point in the foot. I literally said bronies never did that, and then remembered the one time that we did.
Yeah.
But I will still say with confidence, it is not nearly as much of a problem.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Especially not as a certain someone believes.
And a good 3/4 of the time, I see someone defending pedophilia on Twitter. Furry profile picture.
That, yeah, as someone who, like, I do follow a number of individuals, but because pedophilia, unfortunately, is not the only problem. There's also the zoophilia problem, but
Oof.
they're thankfully, like I said, individuals I follow, and we're, calling those people out and saying this has no place here and it never should. And then people trying to get that accepted. It's like, no, like that's not okay. It will never be okay. Like,
this is actually one interesting negative thing that fandoms can do. When you have a fandom that is almost entirely just really, really bad people that are doing really, really bad things, it unfortunately strengthens it. It's basically the Slytherin problem. What happens when you get a bunch of, effectively supremacists in a room together? You empower their supremacy. So it's the same thing with the furry fandom and any fandom, where if too many bad apples, to put it simply, get into the fandom, then it can become extremely hard to make it better.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I agree.
definitely. Let's see here. Next Paladin Pony T said, can you guys name any time fandoms saved a show, movie, or game? We were talking about the Sonic movie earlier. So whether or not the
I wouldn't
fandom
say the
had
fans had no part in the Sonic thing.
Yeah.
Not as much as they like to think they had.
Mm-hmm.
But they were definitely a part of it.
I would agree with that. I'd also say MLP. I mean, there was a period of time when I really was not interested in the show at all, and the only reason I kept up with it was because of the fandom. That was around season 6. So, I mean, fandoms do have that quality. Like, if you form a bunch of friends with people who are in a fandom, you're naturally gonna be talking to them and maybe be more interested in the show than you would had you not gotten involved at all.
I think here's why I would say Star Trek in and of itself is probably a really prime example of this, because when Star Trek originally aired back in the 60s, what a lot of people don't seem to remember is the fact that that show failed. That show was not considered successful. Is there some memorable stuff about it? Like, because it was like the biggest thing that anybody would have told you about that show in the 60s was that first interracial kiss on television. But that show kind of came and went, and Star Trek never really caught on as a fandom or anything until they started airing reruns in syndication. And because there's a reason there is such a very large, wide gap between when the original Star Trek went off the air and when Next Generation started, is because, like, it didn't really seem like there was interest in the show. Now, granted, they did all those movies in between that time, but I don't think Star Trek would be what it is today if it wasn't for the strong fan base that got built around it. It probably would have been just this one and done show that existed back in the 60s, had its run, and then nobody would have ever touched it again. But because it just got that strong of a following, it's like, oh, hey, let's do some more with this, and here we are.
Yeah, but now we've got red shirts, so was it really worth it?
Yes.
Okay.
I do have an example.
I'm just being a troll tonight, really.
Oh, you're a great troll, Brony.
Another clear example, as much as Brony probably hates it, would be the Dragon Ball fandom. Because Z and GT both ended their series in the 90s in Japan.
I already know where you're going with this.
And they didn't finish airing until the early 2000s in English, which is where a lot of the popularity spiked, was from its airings on Cartoon Network's Toonami, and it built up the English fandom outside of Japan, which included Europe and the States, and even more so in Latin American countries where it's still a big thing, even though copyright doesn't exist down there, so you see Dragon Ball Z restaurants everywhere. And that eventually led to Dragon Ball Z Abridged, which is a big thing in 2008, which definitely helped spike up the fandom. And then you got Hollywood involved with Dragon Ball Evolution.
Mm-hmm.
They only had that interest because Dragon Ball was still a huge popularity boost. It still was making money in figures and card games and stuff.
Well, you didn't like
And-
that time that Goku became Avatar: The Last Airbender?
What? Yeah, yes, because it was called airbending in the movie. So yes, you're not wrong.
Yeah, that's why I made the joke.
Stupid.
But what that led to was not only was that movie received so much backlash, Toriyama, the author, was so pissed that Hollywood wouldn't let him help with the movie. He returned to Dragon Ball solely out of spite to make a better movie.
Wow.
And
Yeah,
then we
no,
got Battle of Gods in 2013, and it hasn't stopped the train since.
Yeah,
That is
Toriyama
dedication.
legit. He saw that movie is like, show you who you're talking to, damn it. I was like,
Yeah, because he wasn't allowed to contribute to anything. They're like, oh, we have the rights to Dragon Ball. We don't need you. We don't need the regional author. We can make our own stuff. And Toriyama's just like, bitch. I ripped off all of your movies, and now you're just going to steal from me? I'm making a movie. Frick you guys. My movie's going to be awesome. It's going to have gods.
Yeah, but then we
And
got...
it was awesome. Battle of Gods is one of the best movies.
I was going to say, but then we got Battle of Gods, so was it really worth it?
Yes, Battle of
Yeah.
Gods was great. Resurrection F was a downgrade. But Broly and Superhero, oh my god, if you have not seen Superhero, go see it.
No, I haven't
I
seen
heard
either
things
of
about
those. I'm thoroughly done with Dragon Ball, but...
Superhero is great. It is a return to form, especially for those that are big fans of OG.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So
And
Yeah,
it's a
go ahead.
Gohan movie, so.
We don't get a lot of those. Clayton Hess says, Brawny, we have bigger problems than fandoms. Yes, I know. But tonight we were talking about fandoms. And so unless there's some other chat that anybody else saw that they'd like to address, I think that's a good spot to wrap it up. Did anybody else see any other chat they
I
wanted?
didn't see anything else that was particularly a question.
Okay. So I think that's a good spot to wrap it then. So Acharky, here's what we do at the end of the thing here. We go around the table and you tell me one thing you learned. You give me your final thoughts in a couple sentences and tell me one thing you learned. So Acharky, what do you think?
Well, being asked the question, like, there's, and I had this thought going in, was there's positive and negative sides to everything, and really the fandom problem is more of a human problem, because as long as there's groups of people, there's going to be some good there, but there's also people who are just jerks. And but I would say, if I learned anything from this, is that there can be a lot of redeeming qualities when fandoms do get together and actually do try to promote positivity within like groups of people, and like it's been, and the fact that they can be a very positive outlet for many individuals, and that I think as a fandom, when we see the toxicity, we need to be able to call it out. And I think that's really where we need to be able to say, like, this is not welcome here, and it should never be okay. And while it's easy to point a finger at something and be like, man, I'd love to play Undertale, but man, Undertale fans just ruined it for me. It's actually not as bad as Reddit and Twitter might have you believe. So
Interesting. So tell me one thing you learned tonight.
something I learned. Oh gosh.
I know it's a horribly unfair question. It makes people be introspective. Nobody likes being introspective.
I know there were some stories that, like, I know passed and somebody had. I'd not heard of, like, some of the stuff that you'd mentioned, but dang it, I'm now, like, my mind's a blur. Like,
Alrighty then. Pest. Closing
Yeah,
thoughts and one thing. Closing thoughts and one thing you learned.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So yeah, I mean, in conclusion, I would say that, like, we all have something to. We can all improve in this domain, and that, like, toxicity is something that you have to lead by example in some respects. You know, like it can exist in any fandom, and when you see that, you need to, whether it's in you or someone else, you need to step them aside and be like, you're kind of coming on a bit strong here. You need to reel it back a bit. You know, be a little bit less rabid. And I would say that one thing I learned from this evening would probably be that, I mean, I learned for one that I did not know that producers were nearly as bad. I guess you could say I was a bit out of the loop in that respect. But that is something I've learned. I didn't know that producers were as bad, or that, you know, that they contributed to the problem as much. I tended to think of it as more of a fan thing. I didn't think of it that way. So.
Alrighty then. DJ, one thing, closing thoughts and one thing you learned.
Closing thoughts are, fandom will always be a mixed bag. It's definitely good to keep yourself in check and remember fandoms don't have to be a hive mind. It is made up of individuals and should think as individuals, as well as those on the production line should not treat the fans as enemies, but also shouldn't necessarily treat them as friends either. It's a business. It's a transaction. Keep it as such. As for learning, it's definitely been enjoyable to hear about some of these other fandoms, the troubles that they can cause from those that are in them, since I'm rather exclusive to the ones I keep myself to, so I don't know a whole lot about the fandoms at large, so it's always interesting learning about what troubles they face as well.
Alrighty then. I would say my closing thoughts are, you know, have some depth and understand your audience and stick to the story that you plan on telling. And if you're a fan, just understand your place in it, that you're not supposed to have an effect on the show, but you know, and it's okay to dislike things. You know, some people have forgotten that. If anything, I'm a little too good at it myself. But yeah, it's okay to dislike things. You don't have to watch things. And something I learned. Let me think. What did I learn exactly? Well, you know, something I learned more about the Star Trek fandom. I didn't know that they had saved Star Trek way back in the day. So I thought that was really cool. And this is also the first time hearing of the fans of the Sonic fans are not what caused the change. Like I've heard nothing but you know what we were saying earlier. Hey, this is a victory for the fans. So
No.
that's I'm interested to learn more about that at a later date. Aside from that, that's all I've got to say. Did you gentlemen have fun tonight?
Oh yeah, I had a blast.
Good. It was great to have you on. Acharky, did you enjoy your first debate?
I did. I look forward to maybe doing this again sometime.
I'd love to have you on. It was a pleasure to have you, and if you had fun, that's really all that matters. How about you, DJ?
It's always a blast being on these debates, even if I don't always feel like I'm contributing a whole lot.
You contributed a lot tonight, so I'm very grateful you came on. Alrighty then. So that's about it. Have a wonderful night, gentlemen. Everybody who tuned in, thank you. If it's your first time viewing, I hope I've earned your continued viewership. Shout out to my generous supporters on Patreon who make the bills easier to pay and the content easier to produce. I would highly recommend checking out all these guys. Their links are in the description, especially on those on the $10 and up tier, such as Princess Heather Blossom, Shady Oak Ministries, Sid McConroy, Autoknight, Emerald Spencer, Senko, DJ Skywalker, who's with us tonight, Rein-Kun, Morningstar, Pony Cordero, QFlash, Billy Henline, Alden MacManx, EasyModeGamer, Kanto Acrylic VA, ZoroArc720, Mr. Sonic 31, Ridge the Hedgehog. I'm sorry I made fun of the Sonic fandom so much, and Dark Malcontent, author of the Metaverse series. Have a wonderful night. Be sure to check out Acharky's and Past Analysis videos. Those links are in the description as well. Stay safe. God bless. Have a wonderful weekend. Say goodnight, everyone.
Good night.
Thanks for